Welcome to the beigest setup known to man. Alright, I will get something in the background eventually. Just give me some time. I'm just back from holiday. First main channel video in a while. It's mid-season. We're 11 out of 22 races through the 2022 Formula 1 year. So I thought now's a great time to reflect on all the drivers, rank them all, get your opinions as well, because I did ask you lot on Twitter, on YouTube community, and that's a good prompt to remind you to like the video and subscribe to the channel. About a third of you over the last month aren't subscribed, which you might think, Tommo, that's pretty good. You got to remember, I've only done live streams for the last month, so for people to still not be subscribed, what are you playing at? Don't do me like that. So before we get driver by driver, I thought I'd look at the live streams that I have done, the post-race live streams, where I always give W of the weekend, driver and team, L of the weekend, driver and team, and see who's come out on top. Who's achieved the most of these prestigious awards over the last 11 races? Starting with driver W of the weekend, funnily enough, no one has got this award more than twice this season. And those drivers are Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez, and Zhou Guanyu. Max has obviously been bossing it this year. Perez is still in a fight for a championship, I would say. And Zhou Guanyu, as rookie seasons go, especially compared to last year, been doing a pretty good job. But then Team W of the weekend is far less evenly spread, because with 5 out of 11, Red Bull have taken the honours. Typically their strategies are pretty nailed on. Their drivers winning the championship. Sergio's been doing a very good job. It's no big surprise. And then 6 teams have won it once. So Ferrari, McLaren, Aston Martin, Alfa Romeo, Mercedes and Haas. I literally haven't given it to Ferrari even once, which is, it speaks volumes, doesn't it? They're the good. Now the not so good. Driver L of the weekend. One driver has won this 3 times in 11 races. And it might surprise you, because it's Pierre Gasly. He won it last weekend in Austria, had a very, very meh weekend. Obviously, he took out Lando in Miami. He's not had the cleanest season, and that has reflected here. He's won it 3 times. Yuki Tsunoda, his teammate, has won it twice, because, Canada. And Nicholas Latifi twice as well in the Williams. And then on to Team L of the weekend. And yes, they may have delivered 6 poles in the hand of Charles Leclerc. Both drivers in their team have won races, yet Ferrari with 3 L's of the weekend, ahead of AlphaTauri with 2, who, yes, they've definitely taken a step back this year, and that reflected in the drivers. And McLaren as well, who have had a very up and down, but again, you look at where Ferrari are relative to last year, the fact that McLaren and Ferrari were pretty much identical. The Woking-based outfit have not had the best time, have they? Of course, I will be doing post-race streams for the remaining 11 races of the year, so at the end of the season, we will come back and look at who took it overall. Can Pierre turn it around? Can he recover? Can someone else take Team W the weekend overall? Because Red Bull look like they're going to smash it. Okay, now, all 20 drivers in order from best to worst, in my opinion, and like I said at the start of the video, in your opinion as well. I did put a Google Forms poll out there, got 6,823 responses. It's me versus you lot, all right? Who's got it right? So in P20, averaging for you lot a score of 3.0 out of 10. It's Nicholas Latifi, and for me, it's also Nicky. Sorry, mate. Look, in terms of pros, like Silverstone Q3, great result, P12 in the end of the race, which, yeah, no points, but that does now put him ahead of Nico Hülkenberg on the championship table. He's no longer 21st, although Nico did get a P12, so he kind of not beating him, more like matched him. But unfortunately, that's where the pros come to an end and the cons very much begin. Look, Alex has come in and looked way quicker. Like the average, the delta in qualifying is averaging at about 3/4 of a second. I think it's between half and 3/4. Alex has got in the points and close to the points numerous times, and on a typical dry weekend, Nicky is nowhere near. This is his 3rd year at that same team. You would expect him to be more bedded in and more understanding. Yes, it's new cars for everyone, but he's 27 as well. He's not exactly this young kid coming into the sport who you have to give loads of more chance and opportunity to. This needed to be Latifi's season to step up and kind of take lead of that team, and he just hasn't come anywhere near. So P20, sorry Nicholas, but it's just the way it is, mate. Even the troll responses, 319 of you lot gave him 10 out of 10. Yeah, that wasn't enough to save him. In P19, averaging a score of 3.6 out of 10 was Lance Stroll for you lot. And for me, it's also Lance. Look, I think Lance has put in some pretty solid drives in at times over the course of the year, 3 times in the points in what probably has overall been the second worst car on the grid. He can definitely do a decent job, and he's still only 23, so there is still plenty of room and time for him to potentially grow. But unfortunately, compared to his teammate Sebastian Vettel, he has looked comfortably second best, and that's with Seb missing the first 2 races of the year, remember. So Lance had a bit of a head start in these brand new cars. The peaks have been nowhere near Seb. You know, the qualifying performances have consistently been poor, and he's had his fair share of pretty bozo moments. He clarted Latifi at Australia, took him out in qualifying, had his double punt at Baku as well. Look, it's just not been an exciting season from Lance Stroll, and I think the score reflects that. So then P18 with an average score from you lot of 3.8, so only 0.2 ahead of Lance Stroll. It's the man of the moment that is all, it's Daniel Ricciardo. And I agree. For me, I've also put in P18. And by the way, I also did my ranking before I checked yours. We're going to start disagreeing soon, don't worry. Look, he has occasionally done the job pretty well, okay? So he ran pretty close to Lando in terms of performance throughout kind of Saudi, Australia, Austria last weekend as well. Was okay relative to Lando, pretty good. And, you know, he put his statement out. He still seems very motivated. I don't doubt his motivation in any way, shape or form. I do think he's going to stick it out as best he can. And, you know, after the Bahrain mess for both cars, the season did start pretty well. Unfortunately, after he punted Carlos Sainz at Imola, things seemed to take a bit of a downward trajectory. He's only got 2 point scoring finishes in the last 8 races. Lando's got 6, including a podium. We talked about this at length. I've got nothing more to add to it. It's not good enough. A driver of his standard, his expectation, his experience should be doing a lot better. You only have to go back a year and a half at the end of his time at Renault, and he is still one of the most highly regarded drivers in the sport. It's just been a huge stumbling block. It's done huge damage to his reputation, I think, as a racing driver, because these should be his prime years. And don't get me wrong, I don't think it's just him. I think, you know, McLaren have to take a degree of culpability in that, but we just don't know. We don't see behind the scenes. We only see what the teams choose to put out there and the results at the end of the day. I'm sure there's a lot more going on behind the scenes, but whatever's happening, it's still not going well for Daniel Ricciardo. His season hasn't been the worst season ever in F1, but the standards we expect, I think P18 is fair. P17, and we take a jump up in score now, up to 5.2 out of 10 average from you lot, and a driver I think has probably taken the biggest drop down in terms of performance levels from last year, and you lot have said Pierre Gasly, and so have I. Look, he put a really good performance in Baku. He just loves that gaff. There's something about it that works for him, and he has been hindered by an AlphaTauri package, which I think is quite clearly worse relative to the field than it was last year. And, you know, he's 8-3 up against Yuki Tsunoda in qualifying head-to-heads. There are positives there. But again, given the standards he's set in Formula 1 since his return to Toro Rosso after his poor Red Bull stint, he has under-delivered compared to my expectations. A clumsy punt on Lando in Miami was nowhere near Tsunoda in Spain, and again, a poor weekend last weekend in Austria. Qualifying pace has never really been an issue for Pierre. He's always been able to extract, and I think his qualifying's been alright relative to that car, but in the races, I think that delta between him and Yuki is closed right up. Do I think Yuki's taken a step forward? Yes, but do I also think Pierre's taken a little bit of a step back just so far this year? Also yes. On to P16 and the first disagreement, okay, between the two of us. Let's not let it get in the way, okay? We're still friends here. But with an average rating of 5.4 out of 10, you lot have put Yuki Tsunoda, yet I have put Mick Schumacher. Now, look, hear me out. The reason I put Mick this low, and the reason I think you lot have put him higher, I've got to accuse you of recency bias here, okay? Did he have a strong Silverstone? Yes. Did he have an even stronger Austria? Absolutely. 2 really, really good performances. But we've had 11 races, not 2. Now, K-Mag is 9-2 ahead of him in terms of qualifying head-to-head, but I've said this earlier in the year, you know, you can quote me on it, like, I don't think the out-and-out one-lap pace between him and K-Mag has been that big. I think it's the races where he's typically struggled more in. I've said this many times. I think last year was a bit of a false rookie season for him. And again, I think in these last couple of races, he's shown a bit more of that fire that the Schumacher name is known for, you know what I mean? But when you consider all 11 races, generally speaking, I do think it's been not a great year for Mick. Don't forget the big shunts in Saudi, the big shunt in Monaco as well, costing that team a lot of money. A team that can't afford it. He had a lot of shunts last year, and the fact that he's putting it into the wall and causing as much damage as he is even this year as well is a problem. When you're getting publicly criticised by your team principal, that's never a good thing. Now, do I think he's responded from that? seemingly so in these last 2 races, and I really hope he's going to continue to carry on this momentum, but there's no guarantees. And over the 11 races, I'm saying P16 for Mick. I think he's behind Tsunoda. So then on to P15, and this was the first one to kind of really shock me, because we've really disagreed on like a couple here, and we'll get a bit more into this driver later where I have ranked them, but with an average score of 5.9 out of 10, not even 6 out of 10, you lot have put Sebastian Vettel, P15. 5.9 out of 10. Damn. Whereas I have put Yuki Tsunoda. So I've only put him one place different to where you put him. Now, we'll talk about Seb later, okay? But as for Yuki, look, he's without doubt taken a significant step forward relative to last year in terms of particularly race pace, I think. I think he's doing a lot better job in the races. He's not let Gasly completely take him to the cleaners like he did last year. But it's his second season, so that's fair enough. You should expect that. And I think he's leveled up in line with expectation for me. Problem is, he is still very much, he's not as rough. The diamond isn't as rough, but it's still a diamond, yet it is still far from sparkly and gleamy and clean, you know what I mean? Canada was a monumental L. He undone so much good work that weekend. And that's the thing, you've got to acknowledge the good stuff that he did, but also, when you throw it away, just driving off of the track because you're pushing too hard on cold tyres, he will learn from these things, but that was a big cock-up. And then to also punt your teammate at Silverstone as well. In terms of cock-ups over the course of the season, Yuki's probably had the 2 single biggest ones. Cardinal sins, but his rating is saved because a team principal would rather see the driver push than be, too reserved. And I think they can form him into this absolute weapon that I think he is. Because if it wasn't for them 2 incidents, I would have put him quite significantly higher because, expectation-wise, I've been pretty happy with Yuki this year, generally speaking. But 2023 Tsunoda needs to be a lot more reliable to the team, I think. P14, with an average of 6.2 out of 10, you lot have put Mick Schumacher, who I put a bit lower. I have put Zhou Guanyu. Now, I feel that Zhou is the kind of first driver that I've put on this list who I feel like, generally, there's not really been much bad. It's been like a good level season from him. And, it's a rookie season. We've got no other rookies to compare him to directly. But when we compare to the rookies last year, I think Joe's done a much, much better job. Yes, he's had a fair share of retirements, but all in all, they've not been his fault. Technical gremlins have curtailed his race distances, but himself shunting hasn't really happened. The one shunt he did have was obviously not his fault, and a bloody horrific one as it was. But it's so important in this debut season just to get that mileage in as a rookie. I do also think he maybe benefited from running these kind of bigger rims in F2 that have now carried on to Formula 1. Because I do think as an overall package, especially in these last kind of couple of races where I think he's slightly outperformed Bottas, that's a huge W. That's a huge kind of ball in his court. That Monaco save was an absolute worldie and all. But when you boil it down, look, he's 8-3 down in qualifying relative to Valtteri, which is nothing to be embarrassed about, but we have had rookie seasons in the past when drivers have jumped in. Charles Leclerc 2018, when he jumped into the Sauber, massively outperformed Marcus Ericsson. Joe's had a good year, but has there been enough for me to put him much higher in this list relative to other drivers? Not yet, but it's looking promising for sure. Now, P13, 6.6 out of 10 average. You guys have put Zhou Guanyu. I have put Kevin Magnussen. Called up last minute, jumped into that car, first race in Bahrain, put it P5, insane. It is just generally an unreal story. He's put it in the points 5 times, his teammate only twice. 9-2 to him in qualifying as well, proving how good I think K-Mag is. I think he's one of those drivers that goes under the radar a lot, and I think he's doing a very good job this year. But there's a couple of things, and maybe it is because I do have very high expectations of K-Mag that, I've not put him higher on this list, because from my point of view, it's not unexpected for him to be putting these levels of performances in. And there have been problems as well. I do think he's been guilty of pushing too hard, especially in these battles with Lewis that we saw earlier in the year. I think in Spain and Canada, he is more at fault for both of those instances, and if he drives a little bit more conservatively, he's bringing way more points in. A driver of his experience, I just feel like he got a bit of a blood rush and didn't need to go for those moves, and that does reflect on his score here for me. And Schumacher does seem in these last couple of races to have kind of closed that gap right up, so it'll be interesting to see how K-Mag responds to that, and if he can reassert dominance at that team that he's had so far this season. Okay, P12. And we agree on this one, actually, which Of all of these, I think I'm quite surprised that we agree on this one. But with 6.8 out of 10, you and me have both put Alex Albon. Now look, this is his first season back after a year out, his third season in Formula One, and he's comfortably outperforming his teammate. No question. Brand new team for him to get used to and all, and brand new car, obviously. I think, most people were expecting Albon to outperform Latifi. I think he's doing a better job relative to Latifi than even I expected, because I don't think Albon's at the level of someone like George Russell, for example. But he's got a P9, a P10, a P11, a P12, a P13, even a P14. All in a car which definitely over the 11 races is the worst car on the grids. I mean, yes, maybe with these upgrades that, we saw last weekend at Austria, Alex looked pretty good, so maybe it's not the worst car now, who knows. Williams seemed really happy with him, and I think he's doing a really good job of salvaging the reputational damage that was done in 2020. But it is hard to rate him relative to Latifi because, unfortunately, Nicholas does seem kind of so far off the back. And it's not been all great. Monaco, I gave him driver of the weekend, was an absolute L. Got tons of penalties, blocked Leclerc, wasn't a good weekend. But other than that, honestly, I've been pretty happy with how Alex's season has panned out so far. P11 time, and this is where your scores really start to tighten up from the last one, actually. So Alex got a 6.8. This driver, Carlos Sainz, got a 6.9 from you lot. Whereas my pick for P11, I have gone with Esteban Ocon. Now, this one's a difficult one, right? Because you cannot doubt. You look at the Drivers' Championship, the amount of points Esteban scored relative to Fernando, very good. Was pretty consistent in the top 10 last season and has carried on that trend this year as well. He's a young Frenchman with a lot of time, I think, ahead of him at Alpine to continue to grow, to improve. I think his season's been good. But there are cons, and I think these cons with Esteban aren't quite as clear at an immediate kind of first look, but when you dig a little deeper, they are there. I think the easiest way to explain this, right, is that Fernando Alonso's performances this year, because he's got mad unlucky, have shown that Alpine, I think, is quite comfortably better than the McLaren. Kind of sits almost bang in the middle of the Mercedes and the McLaren in terms of car performance, yet Esteban is 12 points behind Lando Norris. I don't think Ocon has been able to match and hang with Fernando's top performances this year. I think with that car, Ocon should have even more points, should be even higher based off the expectations I have of him, because I'm a big fan of Ocon, you know this, and I just feel like last year him and Fernando were pretty much on a level in terms of performance, really, over the course of the year for me. But I think this year Fernando has been better than Esteban. But then maybe I'm being harsh comparing him to Fernando Alonso, because Fernando does seem to be driving at a pretty insane level, and we'll get into that later. And then in P10, averaging a score from you lot of 7.0 out of 10, is Ocon, and I put Sainz, so it's switcheroo from P11 basically. So we're broadly on the same page here. Now look, he's finally got that win at Silverstone. Been a long time coming, was absolutely chuffed for Carlos. He's been very unlucky at times as well. Again, got punted by Ricciardo in Imola, robbed of an almost certain P2 in Austria with the engine catching fire. Car conked out in Baku, and if he doesn't get caught up in traffic behind Latifi, maybe he wins in Monaco as well. That's a bunch of points that have been left on the table. And I also think in the last kind of couple of races, his pace has felt a lot closer to Leclerc's than it was earlier in the year. But again, that's a problem, because I think, over the course of this 11 race season so far, I think he's been further off Leclerc than he was last year. Quite a bit further off, actually. I think there's a difference fighting for 5th and 6th than there is fighting for a title, and I don't think Carlos has been able to adjust to those kind of expectations in the same way that Leclerc's done, because Leclerc's been there and done that from like 2019. It's never a good thing when your excursions into the gravel become a bit of a meme as well, because they've happened quite a few times this year. Not always his fault, but Australia wasn't great. Look, I don't think he's done too much wrong this season, but also to be 9-2 down to Charles in qualifying isn't great. So now in P9, averaging a score of 7.1 out of 10, you guys have put K-Mag, I've put Seb, and actually these are the two names with the biggest discrepancies between your rating and mine. But look, I do think that when you look at the performances and don't just fixate on the table, there has been a lot more positives from Seb's 2022 season than negatives for sure. Like, bear in mind the context that he missed the first 2 races of the season, right? So he's only had 9 races, and these are brand new car philosophy. There's no real knowledge carried over from the previous generation of cars. They've also gone through a fundamental aerodynamic shift on that Aston Martin as well. Plus, again, from those first 2 races, when you had Hülkenberg and Stroll in the car, it appeared to be, I mean, at best, second worst car. And I think, again, over the course of the season, second worst car on the grid. Yet, if he hadn't have got punted by Gasly in Austria and Schumacher in Miami, which were firmly the other driver's fault, he's probably got 6 point scoring finishes. It's 4 as it is, but it should have been 6, I'd say. Clear of Stroll in qualifying, who again had a head start. And look, I know Stroll gets memed a lot. I don't think Stroll's that bad. I really don't. And it's 7-2 to Seb in qualifying. So he's firmly on top in that regard. I think part of the reason you lot have rated him low than I have is because, you know, he's a 4-time world champion and expectations should be higher. And maybe that's fair. But I think given the car, given missing 2 races, given the times he's been shunted with no fault of his own, I think he's had a pretty good year. Australia was not good, where he just spun on his own. But he'd had 2 races out, first race of the year, brand new car philosophy. I'm kind of going to give him benefit of the doubt there. On to P8, and we've got 3 drivers coming up who all scored 7.2 out of 10. So P8, P7, P6 for you lot can't really be split. There were a few votes in it, so this is the lowest of the 7.2s. You lot gave it to Lewis Hamilton, whereas I've given it to Valtteri Bottas, or as I would say, Valtteri Bottas. I think all things considered, Valtteri has had a very good season, a really strong start. He was running 9th in Saudi Arabia till his engine packed up. And if that hadn't happened, he'd have scored points in the first 7 races of the year in an Alfa Romeo. Very good. Even more impressive given it's his first year at that team as well. He seems to have taken to that leadership role, you know, given that multi-year contract. That seems to have really worked for him. He's delivering consistently. He's got a P5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. But of course, you know, it's a 10-time race winner with over 10 years in the sport, so standards should be higher. And the last couple of races, I feel like Joe seems to have maybe bridged that gap quite significantly. Like, I think the reason I've rated him not as high as you guys have is because you look at Zhou Guanyu's F2 career. Very good F2 driver. Not an exceptional Leclerc, Piastri, Russell, right? But very good. I expected Bottas to beat Zhou more than he is. Just in terms of my feeling, watching qualifying, watching the races, I expected that gap to be a bit bigger given Valtteri's experience. That's all I'll say. But maybe I'm just underrating Joe. Opinions. So in P7 with 7.2, you guys have put Valtteri and I have put Lando Norris. Look, even in that really sus McLaren, Lando still managed a podium this year. P3, well done. The car for both drivers seemed complete trash in Bahrain and Canada. But other than them 2, points in every race. Apart from Miami, of course, where Gasly punted him. But he was running pretty close to the points. I feel like he might have edged a point that weekend. Look, he's been strong, he's been consistent, and he seems pretty on top of these new ground effect cars, and more so than Ricciardo, for sure. There aren't many things that come to mind when I try and think of cons against Lando. I guess just this season hasn't been quite as explosive, quite as special as last year was. Again, the car plays a huge role in that, no question. But I can't sit here and rate him more highly because the car hasn't given him the opportunity to shine as much as he did last year. Because yeah, P6, leader of the 7.2 gang, you've put Lando, I've put Lewis. But either way, the 3 drivers that scored 7.2, we agreed on the 3 drivers, it's just the order's slightly different. And there's probably a few troll votes in there that just kind of chucked it the other way, you know what I mean? But yeah, look, Lewis, 3 P3s on the trot in the last 3 races. Really, really, really strong drives. Canada in particular, he looked absolutely rapid. And he has been very unlucky on a bunch of occasions, especially relative to his teammate George Russell, in terms of losing out on safety car deployments and all that, and it hasn't kind of gone his way. Mercedes clearly have a car that they don't fully understand yet. They've been giving Lewis the more experimental setups. kind of explains why Baku was such an absolute mess for him. He's been running extra sensors, which is a little bit more weight. He's more compromised in setup compared to George because look, he's the experienced driver. Mercedes know how he drives. Obviously, they're going to use him instead of George to try and understand and work out this car because they can't focus on points in the short term. They need to be working long term to get this package working or not working and then changing their mind, right? It makes sense. But I do think this has reflected and had an impact on the quality of Lewis's performances, especially at the start of the year. Now, to what extent, I can't tell you. I don't know. But I do think that accounts for some of the gap between him and George this year. Look, the people out there who hate Lewis, I'm sure have been having an absolute field day. That's all I can say. Haters gonna hate. Top 5 time with a score of 7.6 out of 10. So a pretty significant jump up here. You guys have put Fernando Alonso, whereas I have put Sergio Perez. Now, look, this season has been very good. Okay, we're top 5 territory, so these guys have all had very, very good seasons, all right? Checo has looked much closer to Max this year than he did last year, which is no surprise to me because Max isn't carrying the car knowledge. They're bigger, more kind of understeery cars anyway, and that's not what Max likes. So I think Checo has been able to give a better account of himself relative to Max than he was able to last year. Got that Monaco dub, one hell of a drive, no question. Put it on pole at Saudi and is probably converting that result if, you know, the old pit stop safety car shenanigans go slightly differently, a bit more in his favour. Had a technical retirement at Canada and was punted off by George in Austria, which, you know, I think Sergio could have driven a bit wider, but I still think that was more on George. And the fact that we're still kind of seriously, especially after Azerbaijan, discussing the potential of a Sergio Perez title fight over a third of the way into the season, that speaks for how strong he's been this year. Yes, he's 8.3 down to Max in qualifying. Yes, he's clearly not as quick as Max Verstappen in a typical racing circumstance. But when you're against someone like Max, it's always going to be difficult to shine. So then in P4, 0.2 ahead, you guys have put Sergio Perez, whereas I have put Fernando Alonso. So once again, just one difference, just swapped around, okay? Not much in it. But for me, we need to talk about Fernando Alonso in 2022 because there is a lot to unpack and I think he's been bloody fantastic. Last to 9th in Spain, last to 10th in Austria, set for top 4 minimum, maybe top 3 in Australia if the car hadn't packed up in qualifying. Got P2 in Canada in the wet in qualifying. I mean, there's so many instances of phenomenal Fernando Alonso performances this year, yet his luck has just been hilariously bad. Robbed of opportunities to convert big points on so many occasions. A man who turns 41 at the end of this month. Like, honestly, I know people get sick of the whole, oh, you're always talking about Fernando's age. You look at the other calibre of drivers in Formula 1, right? And look at how often the levels start to fall off when you're getting towards your like mid to late 30s, all right? There's always examples that contrast that, but typically speaking, when you get to that kind of age, you can't be expected to keep those levels up so high, yet blows my mind. It honestly blows my mind that Fernando's able to keep operating at such a stupidly high level. But honestly, last year, I think he was good. I think he was good last year. I didn't think he was anything special, I'll be honest, because I thought him and Ocon were pretty close. And again, to say that Fernando was anywhere near his prime last year would to say that Ocon's close to Fernando's prime, which I don't think is the case, obviously. But this year, I don't know, mate, it's crazy. I don't think this is the norm. I think the man's a freak of nature, I'll be honest with you. The finger wag at TSUNODA, I can't watch the video, it just makes me cry with laughter. I'm actually like, it's too funny. Now, has it been an absolutely perfect 100% of the time clear of Ocon's season? No. There have been a couple of races where Ocon, I just think, has looked more comfortable, better over the course of the weekend. But again, when you take all of that context into consideration, you know, for me, this list is like, you know, who have I been most impressed by? You know, it's almost like not just who's the best, but like most impressed when you consider everything, how long they've been in the sport, how old they are, blah, 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 all this stuff. When you consider all of that, I just think Fernando, I considered putting him even higher than P4, but the top 3 I think are pretty set, yet he's just been insane. So good. So then on to P3. Podium time. Big jump up again in score. 8.5 out of 10. You guys have gone for George Russell. I have gone for Charles Leclerc. So let's talk about Charles, shall we? Because I'm sure some of you might be upset that I've not put him, you know, higher than this. There's only 2 places above. But look, it's been great. Like, don't get me wrong, it's been fantastic, right? He's P3. They're still very good. His battles with Max have been quality. Ferrari Bozo strategy has been vast majority responsible for him being 38 points drift. But the quality of driving has made it and will continue to make it so that that gap definitely isn't insurmountable. Recovery job at Canada was superb. Might have even been better if he'd have had a bit more luck. 6 poles in 11 races, and that Red Bull does look quicker race pace than the Ferrari. So, you know, there's not too much like to say now. Like, he's proven, not that he hadn't proven it already, that he's clearly the real deal, right? This man can clearly fight for a championship if you give him the right car and the right team running the right car, which seems to be the biggest caveat right now. But you can't overlook, and yes, it's one thing in the course of the whole season. You know, Charles was lucky for his car to not DNF when he hit that wall in Imola, pushing too hard, trying to catch Perez, spun. It was a Charles Leclerc of old overdriving mistake. Not the kind of mistake you typically see from someone like Max Verstappen or someone like Lewis Hamilton, really. Yes, it was one. He still managed to recover points. He didn't lose out massively in terms of points, but I just think that illustrated that, do I think Charles is 100% there? The 100% within himself package? I think he's like 99. So that means P2, you lot gave 9.0 out of 10. Charles Leclerc. I gave it to George Russell. So again, switcheroo. I've been more impressed by George this year than I have been by Charles. That sentence quite eloquently kind of encapsulates my feelings. There are always going to be question marks. George jumping into that Mercedes in his first year outside of Williams, alongside statistically the greatest of all time, would he actually be able to deliver on the potential that it showed in F2, on the performances he delivered at Williams? Because that Williams was such a bad car, it was hard for him to get opportunities to really shine. But when he did get those opportunities, he very much took them. So there was a lot of expectation that he'd be good, but I didn't expect him to be this good. Top 5 in 10 out of 11 races in your brand new team, fighting towards the front. All that pressure, all that expectation to be the future of Mercedes on his shoulders, and he's taken to it like a duck to water. He's not looked out of place at all. Yes, do I put him more responsible for the incident with him, Gasly and Joe at Silverstone? Do I put him more responsible for the incident with Perez in Austria? Yes. If it's not for them two, he's number 1. You take those first 9 into account, for me, he's number 1, P1 on this list, 100%. Because the context of this being your first season at this team, on top of how well he's driven, I just think the man's been phenomenal, and he's 100% the minerals to fight for a world championship if they give him the car. So then to P1, the one name that has not been mentioned so far this video. Well, I think I've kind of mentioned him in talking, but you know what I mean. With 9.3 out of 10, you gave it to Max, I gave it to Verstappen. He's leading the championship. He's looked really, really good this year. Again, like, yes, the Ferrari with Charles at the wheel seems to maybe have a pace advantage, you know, in qualifying, but that's not where the points are won, and Red Bull know this. 6 wins so far this year, nursed that damaged car to P7 at Silverstone, and given his tyre wear issues in Austria, I think he did a pretty good job holding Leclerc at bay for as long as he did. I can't think of any real big significant mistakes from Max this year. I think he's been super consistent. I think he's been super on it. And I do think he's raced Charles fairer than he did Lewis last year. I think that is true. I think, you know, he saw his opportunity to win his first world title. I think he chose, and look, it worked out in the end. I think he chose to race more aggressively to really kind of get into Lewis's face, you know what I mean? Whereas I think with this year, you know, him and Leclerc have been racing for years since they were kids. I think there's more mutual racing respect there, and that's been nicer to see. I think with this points gap now, it's going to be an incredibly tall order for Charles to beat Max at this rate, because it's looking pretty ominous for a second world championship on the trot. So there we have it. That's my mid-season report. I've been recording for over an hour now, so let me know what you think in the comments below. Again, like and subscribe, do all that good stuff. My name's been Tommo. Thanks again. Have a good ta-da.